Hi, I'm Phil Noble with Envision, South Carolina, and we're here in Charleston today talking with Linda Ketner, an extraordinary businesswoman, civic activist, and political leader. Welcome to Envision.
Thanks.
You came to South Carolina from North Carolina.
I did.
What made you decide to come here, and sort of what was your impression of South Carolina before you came and before you sort of nestled in amongst us?
Well, I started my own business in '83. And I realized very quickly that I could live anywhere in the United States because I was always on a plane. So I looked for the most beautiful place I could find. And the first time I came to Charleston, South Carolina, I knew this was it. This is where I needed to be and put down my roots.
You've got sort of three distinct parts of your career that I think are very interesting. One is the management consultant stuff, principally outside of South Carolina with major corporations. Then there community activity stuff here in South Carolina and Charleston, and then the political stuff. So let's start with the corporate consulting stuff. You're a corporate consultant, and we in South Carolina are trying to figure out how we become a world-class city in this globally connected environment. What's your three-point consulting plan about how we do that?
I think as a consultant, if I were hired to talk about it, I think we need to stop selling ourselves to business and industry as we've got a cheap labor force and start being and selling. We have a highly educated workforce, and some of the qualities we already have, we don't have that one, but some of the qualities we do have, we can sell. We are hardworking, decent workers here who can contribute a lot to your company. In my business, we always look to the source of the problem. And the source of our economic problems, our poverty problems, our crime problems, on and on, some of the things we score worse in the United States for, reside in education. That's the source, and that's what we need to be focusing on to change the situation here.
Why do you think that we are suffering so in education? I mean, we hear a lot about corporate culture. Is it the corporate culture of our state that just needs changing in terms of how we view education?
Well, it's political culture that needs to change as well. I think keeping an undereducated workforce in the last century and part of this century, when we were mostly textiles and it behooved us, quote unquote, in a very short-sighted way, to have a cheap, undereducated workforce. That's no longer the case, and we can't survive, much less thrive, with that kind of mentality now.
Do you think, in terms of your traveling around and meeting with corporate people nationally and internationally, what do they respond? How do they respond when you say you're from South Carolina?
I have some explaining to do when I say from South Carolina. They have certain prejudices against this region, not just the state. You know, we've been a joke on Jon Stewart for quite a while now for some of our political shenanigans. And also, I think everywhere I go nationally, on a national scene, they see us as an undereducated workforce.
Is there a positive that is out there in the sort of national and global perception about South Carolina? I mean, we know the negative. Is there a positive? Is there something that we can take advantage of that's already out there in the popular perception that's good about South Carolina?
Absolutely. I think it is seen as a jewel in the world in terms of our environment. Our physical environment is unparalleled. And I think the more people live in the winter, the more they look to come here where it's moderate, and I think that sells. And I also think they do understand and value that we do have hardworking, good, decent people here that can be relied on to do a good job for them. The big hole, again, is education. What we need to look at is, in this state, we're 49th in the number of students that graduate high school, 49th. 43% of our students graduate late. No business could survive on that failure rate. They just couldn't. And this state can't survive economically, much less thrive with those kind of numbers. 1 in 4 of our neighbors here in South Carolina are functionally illiterate. And not only it's staggering, it's humiliating, but it's also a recipe for a lack of success.
Do you think the business, I mean, if you look at the sort of the three typical decision-making groups, the business community, the political community, and the citizenry at large, how do you assess how each one of those views education as the problem? Do they get it is the question?
I think two of the three do. I think that business understands it and are trying to find ways to accommodate what's going on instead of being able to lead it. Right. I think citizens understand it. I think political body doesn't understand it.
Why do you think that is? I mean, you know, why are our politicians seem to be so out of touch with the business community and just the average citizens, you think?
Well, I don't think they've clearly identified it as the source of the problem. They would rather give tax breaks to companies to come in that cost us as taxpayers to fund those tax breaks rather than focus on the source of the problem. Laser focus, total focus on we must, in order to level the playing field, to take advantage of our natural resource, which are these good, decent people, and to have a long-term economic success story, we must, without a doubt, have laser focus, laser will on the political body's part to fix the educational system. I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
You don't see them doing it, or you don't see the political process bringing that focus on it?
Both. I don't see them even understanding the ramifications of it and the layers of it. You know, in my business, you're taught don't treat the symptoms of a disease or a problem. Right. Find the source of it. Just if somebody's having migraine headaches, don't give them an aspirin, give them an MRI and find out what's causing it. Right. South Carolina political body does not seem to understand. They treat the symptoms, okay? Right. They treat crime. They build more jails. You know, they treat domestic violence. They have panels to discuss it. At root to most of these problems is a fundamental lack of a viable education system. They've got to focus on this if they want to be economically competitive, not just with other states, but the world. We've got to stop talking about the New South and be the New South.
Be the New South.
Yeah.
That's a great line. You know, you're talking about the social aspect of it. And
Phil, one thing I want to say. They could do some simple things that would make such a difference. If they committed to and made it ironclad that no child leaves the third grade in South Carolina unless they're developmentally disabled. No child leaves the third grade in South Carolina unless they can read. Right. That simple focus would make a tremendous difference in what we could achieve short-term and long-term.
It's very easy to understand, and I would think politically very saleable. You know, every child by the time of 3, yeah. And you know, maybe that's sort of one of the things that maybe we can do out of Envision is sort of try to articulate some of those specifics in a very clearly understood way. Mm-hmm. One of the things that really impresses me in terms of what you've been involved in over the years is you've been incredibly generous financially, but even more importantly than that, you put your time where your money and where your mouth is. And that's a rare combination of somebody who does all three. And the breadth of what you've been involved with on a really significant level. I think the first time you and I ever met was around developing the homeless shelter here in Charleston, which was what, 86 or something like that. Yeah, you know, and homeless not only within the local context, but also you were incredibly involved statewide. You know, the issues of women, you've been involved in those forever. The gender and sexual equality front, you have been not just a leader, but the driving force in that, in this state. And, you know, a whole bunch of other sorts of issues, you know, around human basic need and social justice. I mean, not just the polite easy to talk about at cocktail party stuff, but you know, homelessness, sexual inequality, you know, dealing with poverty, those gut issues. Talk a little bit about how do we start dealing with those issues in a way, given our political environment, given the social environment. What is working in those areas? What do you see that has been successful across those kinds of social, political issues in this state? What's working?
Well, one of the things I love about this state is when I moved here, these were my passions, I brought them with me, okay? Right. One of the things I love about this state is I had quick accessibility to moving into those areas, coming up with ideas, and people's willingness to try them, okay? And particularly around Mayor Riley. My accessibility to him, to talk with him about some of the housing and homelessness issues, and his encouragement, yes, try that, try this, let's do this, let's do that. That's been wonderful, and I've seen it across the board. I see the organizations around South Carolina being open to people that want to make a difference, and that's exciting. How do you deal with those problems? Well, you know, a lot of times I will say to people, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, okay? And the next thing you know, if you've got a voracious appetite and a real appetite for making a difference, you sit down and you have a lot of bites of that elephant, and the next thing you know, there's real change taking place. And in terms of the state housing situation, we've made dramatic change in people's lives. Some 80 to 100,000 people, 68,000 people when we started our initiative with the Housing Trust Fund. 68,000 people in the state got their water from a creek. All right?
That's a stunning number. What year was that? That was the late 80s?
Early 90s.
Early 90s.
Early 90s. And
68,000 people in the early 90s got their water out of a creek.
Here in South Carolina.
Jesus.
Okay. And 870,000 some lived in housing that would be condemned, and that meant that they either didn't have any plumbing or any electricity. 870-some thousand people.
Out of a population of 4 million. So
yeah, it was less than that then.
Yeah,
okay, it was
yeah.
3 and change. All right, so we're talking a real issue. So over the last years with the Housing Trust Fund in place, and that was a citizens' effort. And we went to the legislature, and first, what's the Gandhi? First they laugh at you, then they...
Right. First they laugh at you. No, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win.
That's right. we did all those steps, all right? Because when we showed up at the State House, and we got 4,000 people all across the state, regular citizens involved in this. And we went to the State House, and we went through each one of those phases, including then they fight you, and then you win. Okay? And the other way we made the change is economics is a high priority of our political system here in South Carolina. We sold this program based on it being an economic development program. And guess what? For things like poverty, there is a way to increase economic development by doing the right thing for people. You have to put the numbers to it and present it to people who make decisions about it, but it can be done, and that's the way we did it. So we tried to be smart in what we were doing, and we've made a tremendous impact. Over 140,000 people now live in safe, decent, affordable housing that didn't before we got this bill passed. So those kind of things matter. And
140,000 people with decent housing matters a whole lot.
A whole lot. And you know, when we first started this, I would go into homes and I would see Matthew, they had a bathroom, a little room that was the bathroom, but in the bathroom was no plumbing at all in a green bucket and that sort of thing. And I would see kids sitting doing their homework wrapped in 6, 7 different coats because there was no heat. That's what we need to change, because each one of those children and adults is a natural resource to this state, an untapped natural resource to this state, that if we could really focus on making each one of those citizens, those little girls and boys and their mom and dad, productive, vital members making a difference in South Carolina, we can make it happen. We've already made it happen at a small scale. Let's do it big scale.
Let's focus, keep talking about that a minute. I mean, there's an interesting sort of theme, which says, in essence, don't focus on the moral issue, don't focus on the political issue, just make a business case. And that's how you succeed. And is that what we need to do? I mean, do we, setting aside all the sort of we are our brother's keeper Christian values that we have, do we just go in and develop the business case for better education and argue that business case? I mean, is that a strategy? Do you think that works?
We all come to it from different perspectives. My motivation for doing this, a lot of it's social justice, a lot of it's decency, a lot of it's belief in the human potential, and it all wraps up with it makes good business sense, which is important to me as well.
Right.
But if we have a political will or a bent in 21st century South Carolina toward economic interest, if that's what interests us most, then let's sell it that way, because it's not only decent, it works.
Fascinating. And let's turn to the third piece, politics. You really took the plunge. You ran in 2008, you ran for Congress. Nobody thought you had a
chance in.
Right, the proverbial snowball chance in hell, and you came incredibly close. Why did you decide to do that? I mean, I know you are not someone who, I mean, you like your privacy, and that was a real sacrifice.
Yes, it was.
And difficult.
Yes, and fun.
And fun.
I met some tremendous people. I got frustrated, like most of us are frustrated, and I kept pointing to other people, why don't you run, why don't you run? And then the three fingers are pointing at you. And I thought I could make a difference. And that's what everything I do is about that, really. I want to make a difference on this planet. And I thought I could make a difference. And no, nobody thought I had a chance to win. I got 48% of the votes. 6,700 votes had flipped the other way. We wouldn't be here. I'd be up there fighting with the crazy people in Washington. But I
would rather have you here.
Thank you, thank you. You know, I really feel strongly about this. No one, and I mean no one, has the luxury of being disillusioned about politics right now. There's simply too much at stake. So I had to practice what I was preaching. I had to put myself out there and do it and try. And I think I showed other people that it's doable. You know, we don't have to do it the same old way with the same old people all the time.
Would you run again for something?
Right now, there's some issues in my family. My mom's my priority, but I'm getting old. But I'd like to run again. I would like to make that kind of difference, because I think the political realm is where change can happen. I think we need change in our political realm, and sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Let's talk about gender and sexual issues. You have been an outspoken, not just an advocate, you've been a leader in this state on those issues. And those are tough issues anywhere, but particularly
here. Yeah.
Particularly here. And they're particularly difficult if you go so far as to actually run for office. Talk about your thought processes and how you dealt with those issues and those pressures, and just the whole basic gender and sexual equality issues in the state as a whole. I mean, we all know the statistics about, you know, we're the lowest percentage of women in the legislature. We've got, you know, the women's health laws are pretty draconian, on and on. Talk about that from a political perspective, social, but also a personal perspective.
Well, I think I am a social justice nut, okay? Whether you talk...
I've never heard anybody call that a social justice nut.
I'm sure somebody's called me a social justice nut and worse.
Yeah.
But I think it's changing. I think it's changing very slowly. I had always wanted to be in politics. And I had...
Always? Even
yes.
From when you were a little kid?
When I was a little kid. When I was in elementary school, I wanted to be governor of North Carolina so that I could make sure that African American kids and little girls could play Little League baseball.
That's a pretty good reason.
That was my goal. But I've always wanted to be in politics, and I didn't because of my sexual orientation. And that was another come to Jesus moment for me too, because I had looked deeply into the religious aspect, because I am a believer in God, and I had come to terms with how much God loved me, and that this was part of what He had given me to teach me a whole lot about other people, and fairness, and justice, and kindness, and I'd settled that. And then I said to myself, okay, you've always wanted to do it. There's obviously a need for people that don't have a hidden agenda to go into politics. What's holding you back is fear. So I confronted my fear, and I did it, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I did it. I will always fight for the equality of all people on this planet and them getting a fair shake. And my whole life's purpose probably is at the root about that. And I'm encouraging other people as the state changes to, if you're a woman, if you're an African American, if you're gay or lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, be the best self you can be. And your gender identity or your sexual identity or your femaleness is a big, important part of you, but it's a part of you, and it's just a part of me.
Do you think we are any more or less open, closed than the South as a whole, or the nation as a whole? About sexual and gender issues. I mean, or has the country sort of become nationalized on these issues? Are there real fundamental differences? I mean, I know, Marlboro County is not San Francisco, yeah. but within the context of sort of sharp regional differences, are they that big, or are they just sort of closing over time with new generation and younger people?
They are closing over time with the new generation. We're still 49th in the United States in terms of LGBT rights. Right. So yes, we are behind other states and other states in the South. We are moving in the right direction. Personally, I think the way to change is that we come out as LGBT people and let people know that the person they sit beside in church is LGBT, right. That the person they go to for medical help is LGBT. We're the last state that doesn't have a public official, a publicly elected official that's LGBT. That makes a huge difference.
Is that true?
Yes. Everywhere we've had somebody in the state legislature, things begin to change because the fear factor goes away. Right. You know there's nothing scary about Linda. Right. It's just good old Linda.
If you woke up one morning and the people of South Carolina in their infinite wisdom decided, we're going to make Linda Queen of South Carolina. We're going to take you to Columbia and put a crown on your head, and you're going to be Queen Linda the First, and we're all going to be your loyal subjects, saying, what shall we do? What would you have us do?
All of us would be figuring out how to solve the educational system here. And we'd be using every person as a resource to make that happen. That has to happen. That would be priority one. It would absolutely be priority one, because then we could layer on poverty and crime and domestic violence, and that's what my reign would be about. She would be the educational queen.
Education queen. I like that. I started to say I'd vote for that, but I don't think you'd vote for queen. Are you optimistic? Are you optimistic about South Carolina and the future? I mean, would you say to a young person, yeah, South Carolina is where you can make a difference and where you can have success? Or are you sort of pessimistic given our problems?
I'm extremely optimistic.
Really, extremely?
Yes.
That's an interesting word. Nobody else has used that word yet.
I am. We have an incredible natural resource in our people that is widely untapped. And as soon as we focus and get smart on who we've got as people, I mean, these people are good, decent, hardworking. They're also funny and great storytellers.
We are good storytellers.
Oh my Lord. We have so many that are just literally untapped, and we're undereducating them, And as soon as we turn that around, there's nothing we can't do here because we live in the most beautiful state in the United States, one of the most beautiful states in the world. If we get in touch with what we've got here and we begin to mine that resource and chisel out those diamonds with good education, nothing can beat us.
We all, as adults, have somebody that looks up to us, no matter how sorry we all are. So, you know, and you have, you're a role model for a whole lot of folks. What would you tell them? What's the wisdom of your years that you would?
Well, I would tell them four things. First, obviously, as I've talked about, get a good education. The second thing I would tell them is leave this state for 4 years minimum. Okay,
right.
Leave the region.
Right.
Leave
the country.
Leave the country. That's even better, because I want our young people to see different ways of looking at the problems that we have. And if they stay here, sometimes they get xenophobic and they get provincial, and this is the way we've always done it. So go somewhere else, experience something else. Doesn't mean you'll change your mind, don't even necessarily want you to, but I want you to critically analyze what you believe and what you think is possible. So get out of here for 4 years and then come back and make a difference, okay? The third thing I've addressed before, you must become politically involved. I don't care whether you like politics. You don't have the option. None of us have the option of ignoring politics, so get politically involved, because citizens need to take back government in South Carolina and in the nation. And then the fourth thing is I would ask them on a regular basis to look at themselves in the mirror and say, am I making a difference? Because I think that's what we're here for on this planet, to make a difference. Am I making a difference? In my family, in my community, in my state, in the nation? Am I put here and doing my job and making a difference? So those are the four things I would tell somebody that had the misfortune to look up to me.
Our mantra here is Envision South Carolina, world-class, globally connected. And in that different world, if you will, what are the academic or school-based focus or skills that you think are most important?
You know, one of the things I've been thinking about recently is the move away from a liberal arts education into specialties, and particularly technology and the like. I think that the liberal arts education is essential to look at problems from all kinds of different ways. Yeah. And I understand the economic argument for specializing in some sort of technological field, et cetera, but I think we're going to lose something. I think we're going to lose the big picture as we move away from emphasizing liberal arts education. So I would encourage students to get that liberal arts education base, and then if they want to specialize in a field, technology or otherwise, go ahead. But I'm really concerned that even in high school, we're talking about tracking kids early. You need to be able to see the forest before you get into the trees. And we need big thinkers who can see the forest. There's one other statistic that really drives me crazy around poverty, and that is that we rank second on the wrong end for food insecurity in this state, and that's a fancy new word for
hunger.
142,000 of our neighbors go to bed often hungry.
Right.
How can anybody succeed with that kind of human and economic drain?
And on at the same time, we now have huge obesity problems. Mm-hmm. So we've got, hunger and obesity in the same place at the same time, and talk about sort of a total social disconnect. It's just stunning. I mean, to think about those two ends of the spectrum, we've got both problems at the same time.
But ask yourself, how many times have you heard the people at the State House talking about the things you and I have been talking about today?
Right, right.
The conversation hasn't even begun. Envision South Carolina, world class, globally connected.
Outside of South Carolina with major corporations, then their community activity stuff here in South Carolina and Charleston, and then the political stuff. So let's start with the corporate consulting stuff. You're a corporate consultant, and we in South Carolina are trying to figure out how we become a world-class city in this globally connected environment. What's your three-point consulting plan about how we do that?
I think as a consultant, if I were hired to talk about it, I think we need to stop selling ourselves to business and industry as we've got a cheap labor force and start being and selling we have a highly educated workforce. And some of the qualities we already have, we don't have that one, but some of the qualities we do have, we can sell. We are hardworking, decent workers here who can contribute a lot to your company. In my business, we always look to the source of the problem. And the source of our economic problems, our poverty problems, our crime problems, on, some of the things we score worse in the United States for, reside in education. That's the source, and that's what we need to be focusing on to change the situation here.
Why do you think that we are suffering so in education? I mean, we hear a lot about corporate culture. Is it the corporate culture of our state that just needs changing in terms of how we view education?
Well, it's political culture that needs to change as well. I think keeping an undereducated workforce in the last century and part of this century, when we were mostly textiles, and it behooved us.
Hi, I'm Phil Noble with Envision, South Carolina, and we're here in Charleston today talking with Linda Ketner, an extraordinary businesswoman, civic activist, and political leader. Welcome to Envision.
Thanks.
You came to South Carolina from North Carolina.
I did.
What made you decide to come here, and sort of what was your impression of South Carolina before you came and before you sort of nestled in amongst us?
Well, I started my own business in '83, and I realized very quickly that I could live anywhere in the United States because I was always on a plane. So I looked for the most beautiful place I could find, and the first time I came to Charleston, South Carolina, I knew this was it. This is where I needed to be and put down my roots.
You've got sort of three distinct parts of your career that I think are very interesting. One is the management consultant stuff, principally out,
quote unquote, in a very short-sighted way, to have a cheap, undereducated workforce. That's no longer the case, and we can't survive, much less thrive, with that kind of mentality now.
Do you think, in terms of your traveling around and meeting with corporate people nationally and internationally, what do they respond? How do they respond when you say you're from South Carolina?
I have some splaining to do when I say from South Carolina. They have certain prejudices against this region, not just the state. You know, we've been a joke on Jon Stewart for quite a while now for some of our political shenanigans. And also, I think everywhere I go nationally, on a national scene, they see us as an undereducated workforce.
Is there a positive that is out there in the sort of national and global perception about South Carolina? I mean, we know the negative. Is there a positive? Is there something that we can take advantage of that's already out there in the popular perception that's good about South Carolina?
Absolutely. I think it is seen as a jewel in the world in terms of our environment. Our physical environment is unparalleled. And I think the more people live in the winter, the more they look to come here where it's moderate, and I think that sells. And I also think they do understand and value that we do have hardworking, good, decent people here that can be relied on to do a good job for them. The big hole, again, is education. What we need to look at is, in this state, we're